Coming up on this episode, a big free agency preview on the Warriors. What I would do with Jonathan Kuminga, players I'd potentially look to target in a sign and trade, and players I'd look to target as free agents in what's sure to be a big few days ahead. Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. It's just gone 9 a.m. my time here in Australia Sunday morning, which makes it around 4 p.m. in the Bay Area at the moment, which is pretty relevant because we're now less than 48 hours from free agency. I do want to specify before I go on to talk about the Warriors and their free agency plans potentially over the next half an hour here. I do want to specify that things obviously can change very quickly, and what I'm saying now might not be relevant in 5, 6, 24 hours time, whatever it may be. Obviously, I did an episode earlier in the week where I spoke about Kristaps Porzingis as a potential trade target for the Warriors, and then literally the second that I pressed publish on that podcast, Porzingis was traded to the Atlanta Hawks, and that suddenly became totally irrelevant. So things move quickly. Obviously, if there are some significant moves made here by the Warriors, I'll jump back on and do another podcast, but you can also check out my writing over on bluemanhoop.com. That's where I really try and get out my reactionary pieces as quickly as possible as news comes to hand. But let's get into free agency here and what we could see from the Warriors and the state of their roster after the second round of the draft, obviously on Thursday, where they took Australian forward Alex Tui, 52nd overall, and traded up to the 56th pick, where they took Florida guard Will Richard. Currently, the Warriors have 9 players under contract for next season. They are Stephen Curry, Jimmy Butler, Draymond Green, Moses Moody, Buddy Hield, Brandon Podziemski, Trace Jackson Davis, Guy Santos, and Quinton Post. Now, it's worth noting that TJD, Santos, and Post all have either team options or non-guarantees on their contract. I think I'd be shocked if any of those guys aren't on the roster, or even if, they might not be on the roster, but their only way, I think, of not being on the roster is being traded. Like, those guys, their contracts are either going to be picked up or they're going to be guaranteed. Like, there's no way that the Warriors are just releasing one of those guys and not picking up their contract. I think I spoke after the draft on Thursday that the addition of Alex Tui might cause some concern for Guy Santos and his future going forward, but there's no way after what we saw from Guy this past season that they're just going to let him walk and not pick up that team option for $2.2 million. Obviously, it's a pretty valuable contract. Same with Post, same with TJD. So I'd be shocked if those guys aren't on the roster, and the only reason they wouldn't be on the roster is because they're part of some trade, a smaller salary or something involved in that. So the Warriors are currently, with those 9 players, $170.9 million, which makes them $25.5 million from the first apron and $37 million from the second apron. Obviously, what the Warriors can do here in terms of that is going to be wholly dependent on Jonathan Kuminga and what Golden State decide to do with him. Now, they have now extended the qualifying offer to him of $7.9 million, which is not really relevant because he's not going to accept that. Now, he technically could. He could say, I'm just going to accept $7.9 million and come back next season and then be an unrestricted free agent where the Warriors would have no leverage in 12 months' time. But I'm not sure why Kuminga would give up that the opportunity for the payday that he's about to get just to almost spite the Warriors kind of thing. Like, I just don't, that's just not going to happen. The only thing that means in terms of the qualifying offer is that he becomes a restricted free agent. If the Warriors hadn't tendered that, then he does automatically become an unrestricted free agent and he could walk to any team that he wanted. So obviously this was a move the Warriors were always going to make. They weren't going to let Jonathan Kuminga become an unrestricted free agent. What I would say in regard to JK right now, from what I've just heard from some of the insiders on recent podcasts and stuff, I think there's some growing pessimism now on him returning to the Warriors. I think there's a growing feel that the fit between what he wants to be, obviously we saw that report from Anthony Slater of The Athletic earlier in the week where he interviewed JK while he was in Cleveland training, and JK continued to reiterate his wish to become a star, to have a prominent role, a starting role. And I think the fit between him and the Warriors is just obviously not there, and not there to a point that even with the complications, the CBA complications, the fact that the Warriors can only take back 50% of JK's outgoing salary, I think the fit concerns might actually outweigh that in the end. And so to me, there is a growing feel, I think, from what I'm reading and from what I'm hearing from different insiders, that I believe JK will probably be involved in some kind of sign and trade here. Now, the Warriors still have to get adequate value in return. And I know Tim Kawakami on the latest episode of the Warriors Plus Minus podcast said that the Warriors might have to accept 50 cents on the dollar in terms of what they get back in a trade. That would be a disaster. That would be a flat out disaster. And in that case, I would bring Kuminga back. So I think the Warriors will probably go into this thinking, okay, we understand the fit concerns, and therefore if we can get something we like back, then we're absolutely going to do it. But again, if there's nothing out there, like, they shouldn't just accept nothing or someone that doesn't fit themselves or just isn't really a good basketball player at the end of the day. So my personal belief is that Kuminga is probably gone, which is unfortunate because I'm actually, I don't know, some of you guys in the YouTube comments, I think some of you think I'm a Kuminga hater or anything like that. I'm a big fan of JK. I wanted him to succeed at the Warriors. And if he does depart, I'll be pretty sad about that, to be honest, because I do think he does have the potential to become a star in this league. It just, as we've been saying for years now, it just doesn't look like it can happen at the Warriors, given the fit concerns, given the fact that this team is still built around Steph Curry, now Jimmy Butler, Draymond Green, and the fit concerns there in terms of JK not necessarily getting a prominent role and his inability or unwillingness to do more of the role player aspects. And again, like, there's been a lot of criticism of JK following kind of his comments in that Slater report about his want to be a star and all that. I've got no issues with JK wanting to be a star and wanting to spread his wings. Like, I've got no issue with any person in the world, whether it be a basketball player, whether it be anyone in life, wanting the best for themselves and trying to be their best possible self in their profession. Like, everyone should be encouraged to do that. And so this idea that, oh no, JK should shut up and just try to and just accept a lesser role, except, doing the role player things alongside the veteran trio. Would we love that? Yeah, absolutely. But should we demand that of Jonathan Kuminga? I don't think so. I think the biggest thing that I want to mention here that I think goes under the radar here is that this kid is 22 years old. He's 22. So when people say, oh, we've had 4 years of this, give it up, let him go. Like, it's not as if he came into the league at 22, which a lot of guys now do, particularly guys that were drafted in the second round. Obviously, JK, a seventh overall pick. Sorry. But obviously, a lot of guys come into the league at 22 now, and by the end of their fourth years, they're going to be 26. Like, at the end of Quentin Post's fourth year, he's going to be 28. Same with like TJD. Jonathan Kuminga, end of fourth year, sure, but he's still only 22 years old. He's still finding his way in life, let alone as a basketball player. And so to me, that kind of goes under the radar. There is a big difference between a 22-year-old at the end of their fourth year and like a 26, 27-year-old at the end of their fourth year. And therefore, I think we do underplay sometimes what his star power could be in this league if he does get the right opportunity. And so that's why ultimately I'm going to be disappointed if he leaves. I understand from both parties why this will probably happen, but I think it does have the potential to bite the Warriors in the backside down the track. So I think he's probably going to depart. I'll get into a potential sign and trade opportunity here in a second. But in terms of the Warriors and their current payroll, so again, as I said, $25.5 million to the first apron, $37 million to the second apron. Someone said in the YouTube, or asked in the YouTube comments after the last episode, whether the Warriors can take $7.5 million back, or $7.5 million more back in a Kuminga sign and trade or any trade this offseason. That is correct. That is true. So you are allowed to take $7.5 million more back in a trade if you stay under the first apron. So, for example, if there is a Kuminga sign and trade and he gets, say, let's say he apparently, according to Brett Siegel of Clutch Points, he wants $30 million. If you got $30 million, 50% of that obviously is 15 plus 7.5, $22.5 million. That's what the Warriors could take back in a trade. Now, again, they'd have to stay under the first tax apron to be able to do that. But it is plausible. In terms of other things the Warriors can potentially utilize here, other tools, if Kuminga walks, right, and they don't really get anything back for him, then they're going to have the full non-taxpayer, which is $14.1 million, which should get you a pretty decent player, I would imagine. Otherwise, they're probably going to have the taxpayer MLE, which is for teams between the first and second tax apron, which is 5.7. Again, that could get you a veteran player that's reasonable. We'll talk about potential options. They've also got this Kyle Anderson trade exception at $8.8 million, which they could potentially use. Again, that cannot be combined with other salaries, right? So you can't just add that on to Kuminga. You can't just add that on to Moses Moody and say, let's use Moody's contract and the TPE of Kyle Anderson to get to 20 million. You can't do that. Essentially, that's just a way for the Warriors to bring in a player that is making $8.8 million or less without actually having to give out any kind of salary or give out a player. So they're the kind of tools at the Warriors' disposal here. In terms of a potential Kuminga trade, right? So I'm going to be trying to be very optimistic about this from a Warrior standpoint. Let me know what you think. It's a 3-team sign and trade here. Obviously, in terms of Kuminga's markets, we've got the Chicago Bulls, the Miami Heat. They're probably the prominent two, and then the Sacramento Kings have also been linked to JK as well. I don't really want to do a deal with the Heat whatsoever. Like, I think there's not really many players I want. Wiggins is probably the only one, but that's complicated because you'd have to include Moody in the trade. And from that standpoint, is it worth giving up Kuminga and Moody to bring Wiggins back? I don't think so. I think in that position, I would probably just bring Kuminga back. And then if I wanted to trade him directly for Wiggins by the mid-season deadline or once he becomes trade eligible, then I could do that. I don't necessarily have to pull the trigger on that right now and have to relinquish Moody in the deal as well. And then in terms of other options that Miami could have, like they're not obviously not going to give up Tyler Hero or Bam Adebayo. They're not going to give up Khalil Ware. Jaime Hackers is probably the best player you could get, but then there'd be other salary included in that because Hackers is still on his rookie deal. The Warriors did like him going into the draft, but his second season was just flat out not good. Obviously had a great rookie year. Second year, not so good. And therefore, if he's your main guy you're getting back for Kuminga, I just don't love that whatsoever. Duncan Robinson, I don't want Duncan Robinson for great shooter, cool. I don't want him for Jonathan Kuminga. That's awful. That is goddamn awful. So I think Chicago probably have the it's funny to say because it's Chicago, but I think they probably have the better roster in terms of potential trade candidates for the Warriors to consider. Obviously, Vucevic is one that I don't really want, but I'd probably prefer him over Duncan Robinson, for example. I don't know. And then Kobe White is probably the biggest one. Lonzo, again, I don't think I wanted necessarily Lonzo just by himself for Kuminga, but Lonzo I think would have been a strong fit for the Warriors, a guy that could have played alongside Steph, given his off-ball shooting ability and given his defense at 6'6", but could have also kind of filled the void of a backup point guard role in the second unit alongside Jimmy Butler. So unfortunately, that's not going to be the case because Lonzo has been traded to the Cleveland Cavaliers for Isaac Okoro in a deal earlier today. Interesting one for both. In fact, I love it from a Cleveland standpoint. I'm surprised that there wasn't a pick going to Chicago. I know Lonzo, injury issues, only just returned from basically a 3-year layoff, but I think he could be for Cleveland what Alex Caruso was for the Thunder. And I think I'm not a huge fan of Isaac Okoro. He's a slightly worse version of Moses Moody to me. And so, the Warriors probably could have just flipped Moody for Lonzo Ball. Now, would you have done that? Maybe not. Maybe you value Moody a little bit higher. He's still young, got some potential kind of thing. Obviously, if Lonzo was fully healthy and whatnot, then yeah, sure, you'd do that. But the fact he's only played 35 games since, 2022 or something. Like this is why there wasn't a whole lot of value there necessarily for him in the Bull zone. They're getting Isaac Okoro. But sorry, we'll get back to this Kuminga sign and trade to the Bulls that I'm going to do. And I'm also going to include the Brooklyn Nets in it as well. So I put this through the trade machine. I was there working it out for about half an hour, and I think this works. So Kuminga goes to Chicago, right, on a deal that's around 3 years, $90 million. He wants $30 million, 3 years, 90, whether it be a player or team option on the third year, maybe. Who cares? Doesn't matter. I wouldn't mind that being a descent. And this is something to note with the Kuminga contract. Can we try and get a descending contract here, please? Where the first year is actually the highest year in terms of salary that Kuminga gets, because obviously that's going to help the Warriors in terms of the outgoing salary and what they can potentially bring back. So can we get a descending contract going, please? Maybe if it's a 3-year, $90 million deal to the Bulls, it's like 31 next season, 30 the year after, and 29 in the final season. I don't know. We'll wait and see. I'm just whenever I get a notification on my watch, I'm always checking at this time of the off season, obviously, because it could be anything in regard to trade, free agency, that kind of stuff. Anyway, Kuminga to the Bulls on that 3-year, $90 million deal. Zach Collins, Moses Moody, a 2028 top 3 protected first round pick from the Warriors, and a 2029 top 5 protected pick from Chicago go to Brooklyn, right? And then Cam Johnson and Kobe White to the Warriors. So let me lay that out from a team-by-team standpoint. The Warriors trade Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody, and a top 3 protected 2028 first-round pick for Cam Johnson and Kobe White. Would you make that move as Warrior fans? Again, Kuminga, Moody, and a top 3 protected 2028 first for Cam Johnson and Kobe White. That's a deal. Now, do you love giving up a future first round pick alongside those two young former lottery picks? Not really, but I think it's you probably have to do it to try and incentivize Brooklyn here. So from a Brooklyn standpoint, you give up Cam Johnson. You've just drafted 5 guys in the first round, by the way. You give up Cam Johnson, and in return, you take on Zach Collins' expiring contract. You get Moses Moody, a young wing, and you get a 2028 top 3 protected first from the Warriors and a 2029 top 5 protected pick from Chicago. I think that's reasonable value. It's 2 first round picks and Moses Moody for Cam Johnson. I don't know. I don't think there's too many Brooklyn fans watching this, but if you are, I don't hate that necessarily. And then you take on the expiring deal of Zach Collins. And then if you're Chicago, I suppose the issue is you're giving up White and a pick for Kuminga, which I think they might not go for. But then again, you also get the financial relief of getting off Zach Collins' contract. So I think that's probably where they have to give up the pick, is getting off Zach Collins. Because otherwise they'd probably look at Kobe White and a pick for Kuminga and think, no thanks, we don't want to go that far. We might be interested in Kuminga, but we don't want to give Kobe White, who's a more proven player at this stage, even if Kuminga with his size, athleticism has a little bit more upside. I think, and there could be a deal here where it's some kind of, in fact, it'd be unlikely, but we obviously saw the Bulls just do a straight. The Bulls have a history now of doing straight swaps with Giddey for Caruso or Caruso for Giddey, and then now Lonzo for Okoro. Maybe there's some kind of Kuminga for White, because as the guys on the Warriors Plus Minus podcast have said, like, Kobe White's probably the best player that you might get, like the highest caliber player you might get in a Kuminga sign and trade. So maybe it's just a Kuminga for White swap. Obviously, the financial elements in there might need a team like the Nets or a third team to get involved in that. But let me know what you think. Let me know what you think from a Warriors standpoint, if there's any Bulls, any Nets fans out there. But from the Warriors, like getting Cam Johnson and Kobe White in, I'm all about trying to generate more offense, right? Trying to get more guys around Steph and Jimmy who can not only, take advantage of, Jimmy's playmaking and Steph's gravity and hit open shots, but also can do more than that, can create a little bit for themselves, can dribble, can pass, like all these, multiple elements in basketball that are so important rather than just having, and I think the Warriors have got had too many guys on their roster last season. Sorry. Who were like one-way players who were either real offensive limitations or real defensive limitations, and particularly the offensive limitations when you've got Jimmy and Draymond who aren't being guarded from beyond the arc, then it's really also hard to have a Gary Payton II, to have a Kevon Looney, to have a Trace Jackson Davis, right? Like, you need guys who have some offensive versatility, who can space the floor for you. Cam Johnson, obviously one of the best shooters in the league, hands down, and I think would be a great fit with the Warriors. And then Kobe White as kind of a third or fourth guy, as a guy like Steph. He's going to be 30. He's going to turn 38 next season. Jimmy's going to be 36. Like, you want a couple of young guys to come in who could potentially take some of the scoring load. And I think White and Johnson can do that. Now, Kuminga could do that as well if you keep him. But then when Steph and Jimmy are actually available, like Kobe White, Cam Johnson present as much better fits alongside those veteran guys than a Kuminga does. Like, it's all great to say, oh, Kuminga can come back and he can take the workload off Steph and Jimmy. Well, Steph and Jimmy, we still need them to play 60, 70 games. They're not going to be out the whole time, touch wood. So, we'll wait and see what happens. But I think trying to get more offense here, trying to get more shooting, more guys that can make stuff happen off the dribble, I think is important. And Kobe White certainly provides that. And Cam Johnson, just purely from a shooting aspect, provides that. Then when we get to free agency, just a few guys that I would like to target here, right? I still think, so the whole Quinton Post thing is really, really fascinating to me. And is almost like the second biggest watch behind Kuminga for me in terms of whether they actually target a veteran big man. Now, as I said before with Jimmy and Draymond and the fact that defenses don't guard them from the perimeter, like, you have to have a floor spacing five. Like, I saw Bobby Marks suggest a trade of Moses Moody for Mitchell Robinson, right? How can you have Butler, Draymond, Mitchell Robinson front court? Like, you just can't. Like, whatever the Warriors do at the center position entering next season, it's pretty clear it can't be Draymond from the start of the season. Like, you just can't ask him to do that. And it's also pretty clear it has to be a guy that can space the floor. Now, Quinton Post does do that. 40.8%, team high, 40.8% from beyond the arc in his rookie year. Fantastic. But the defensive and rebounding concerns with him, combined with the inexperience, that's a big risk to take, as I continually say, a big risk to take, to invest the starting center role into such a young big man. I don't know. Like, I just don't think that's the kind of move that a playoff contending team should be relying on. And what I mean by relying on is, I'm not completely averse to Quinton Post being the starting center. However, what can't happen is you go into next season with him as your only option. And then if that doesn't work, you're looking around thinking, what are we going back to TJD? Like, and then the spacing concerns come up. This is why I think the Warriors have to have some kind of floor spacing big man. Now, Naz Reid, we just saw what he got, 5 years, 125. That's not an option. You'd assume Miles Turner would be back with Indiana. That's not an option. So the Warriors are going to have to look at cheaper free agent types. Brook Lopez, I know he's 37 years old. He showed signs of decline this past season. Kawakami on the latest Warriors Plus Minus podcast said that he spoke to a Warriors person who basically said, nah, like, he had a bad year. Well, my argument to that would be, if he had a quote-unquote bad year, and yet he still averaged 13 points, 5 rebounds, nearly 2 blocks, shot over 37% from 3 on a team, and was the starting center on a team that went 48 and 34. Like, that's not horrific. That's not, even in a bad year, right? So yes, he might be showing some signs of decline, but I think that's a potential option for the Warriors. I'd be promising Brook Lopez probably the starting role, but saying to Quinton Post, look, if you outplay him in preseason and training camp or early in the season, then you can take that role, right? There's no, like, yes, we'll tell Lopez he's probably going to be the starter, but he's going to have to work for it, right? He's going to have to come in and contribute. And then again, if you've got him, at least that's an alternative to Quinton Post, a veteran who's been there, done that before for 17 years, has played in countless big games, countless huge playoff games. right? So I would be going after Brook Lopez. If it's not Brook Lopez, Al Horford as well, right? Again, veteran guy, nearly 40 years old, but still a guy who averaged over 25 minutes a game last season. Now, do these guys even need to play 25 minutes a game? Probably not, right? Because I still think Draymond might play like 15 minutes a game at center, maybe 10. Let's say 10. The 5 minutes to close the first half, 5 minutes to close the second half, right? That leaves you 38 minutes, okay, where you could potentially just split that between, let's say, a Lopez and a Post, right? Lopez plays 19 minutes, Post plays 19 minutes, something like that. You might even get something out of TJD if he can develop this offseason as well. So if you sign a guy like Brook Lopez and Al Horford, yes, I think it's critical that they do that and provide some kind of alternative option, veteran alternative option to Post. But I don't think they necessarily have to come in and play 25, 30 minutes a game like they constantly have done throughout the course of their careers. Right. So I think they still have something to give, something to offer when you're talking about a slightly lesser role in minutes per game. And also the fact, like, if you're getting these guys on the TPMLE at 5.7 million or less, like, what can really go wrong? Honestly, what could go wrong? To me, there's not much, right? And again, I think you need a jolt offensively. You need to have a floor spacing big man next to Jimmy and Draymond. And I'm not completely against that being Quentin Post, but I think you need an alternative option. Like, you can't just be going all in on Quentin Post and not have a backup plan, not have another option there in terms of a floor spacing big. So that's what I think they need to target primarily, is a Lopez or a Horford type. Again, I'm not sure who the other options are. Bobby Portis is a guy that is continually being linked to the Warriors. We're gonna see here, by the time you're watching this or listening to this, you'll probably know whether or not he's going to opt in or opt out of his player option for next season. So we'll wait and see what happens there. But he's a guy that's been linked to the Warriors. I don't love Bobby Portis. I don't view him as a starting center because he's 6'9", not great defensively, not a rim protector by any means. I could see him closing games for the Warriors potentially, but I wouldn't necessarily be going with Bobby Portis necessarily, particularly given it's going to have to be a sign and trade. That guy's going to be wanting at least like $15 million a year at least. You know, you just saw Naz Reid get 25. Bobby Portis, I'd imagine, will be asking for at least 15. Right. So I just prefer to have a certified actual center in Lopez or Horford making 5.7 million or less. Now, can you get those guys? Maybe they get more as well. We'll wait and see, but I think it's a more realistic and more valuable option. In terms of other free agents, the one that I think the Warriors should absolutely be going after, again, he's old. Don't get me wrong, he's old, but this guy continues to be a very impactful role player in the league. And not to mention, it would also be hurting one of your closest rivals, and that is Nick Batum. Right, so he has just, according to Shams Charania, just opted out of his player option for next season, making him an unrestricted free agent. I think it's likely that he probably returns to the Clippers on a new deal. But again, this is a guy we know. We know the Warriors have had interest in him on multiple occasions. I think it was the 2021 offseason and maybe 2023 as well. Like, they've had plenty of interest in Nick Batum in the past. And that's a guy to me who would be a perfect Warrior player. And I think the Warriors need guys on the wing, forward positions who can knock down shots, but also he's just like a more experienced, more savvy, maybe more trustworthy version of Moses to me. Now, again, if you trade Moses Moody, then that becomes a bit of a hole that a guy like Nick Batum could fill. So again, I expected him to return to the Clippers, but if I'm the Warriors, I'm going hard after Nick Batum, albeit he's 36, 37 years of age himself. Right. In terms of other options, I don't know. There's not too many. I think Melton is probably the biggest one for me, reuniting with him as a potential free agent on a minimum contract. We know how well it fit for 6 games last season, including the last 2 games as a starter next to Steph in the backcourt, where he was excellent. I think he had 19 points, 10 rebounds in a road win against the eventual champion Thunder. And then he had something like 12 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists against the Mavericks in Clay's homecoming, where he did his ACL, obviously, unfortunately, in the last few minutes. So as I've said before, if he's not too disappointed or upset by the fact the Warriors traded him in December for Dennis Schroeder, then that's a guy that I'd definitely be looking to bring back, particularly on a minimum contract. Yes, it would be, it's a risk given the injury issues, but again, at the minimum, that's just got so much upside, so much upside, and we know it works. And if I'm him, I'm probably looking at the Warriors and thinking, I know it was only 6 games, but it did work. And really, I want to try and have a good year, rehabilitate my value to get another decent payday next offseason. I know it works with the Warriors, so why would I risk going elsewhere? I don't know. We'll wait and see. I'm sure there'll be plenty of teams out there, including a team like the Lakers or something like that, that would be certainly interested in DeAnthony Melton. Other ones, Taurean Prince, in terms of that kind of 3-and-D wing forward type, you have, the Warriors could have interest in him. Nickeil Alexander-Walker is obviously a big name now that Naz Reid has re-signed with the Timberwolves, and you expect Alexander-Walker to be on the move. I think he's going to be out of the Warriors' price range. Bruce Brown, I don't love Bruce Brown. Again, his limitations as a shooter, to me, I don't like that at all. However, he's kind of a two-way guy. He can do a bit of everything, and I can just see the Warriors loving that. I can see the Warriors thinking and believing that Bruce Brown would be a perfect fit in their system. And you know what? He might just be a better version of GP2. Right, just a better version of GP2. But he hasn't also done anything over the last couple of years after leaving Denver and being a huge part of their championship team as well, obviously. So we'll wait and see with him. Portis, I mentioned. Miles Turner, I mentioned as well, likely to be out of the Warriors' price range unless there's some kind of Kuminga sign and trade. Again, I'd believe that to be unlikely and that he'll return to Indiana. So in terms of like that trade that I proposed before and what the Warriors could potentially have here. So after my trade, and if you signed, let's say Lopez and Batum, which I'm not sure they'd be able to get both because at least one of them would have to be on a minimum, and I doubt that. You'd basically have a 12-man roster of, a starting lineup: Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler, Cam Johnson, Draymond Green, Lopez or post, and then Kobe White, Brandon Podziemski, Buddy Hield, Nick Batum, Lopez or post. And then you'd have TJD and Santos as 11 and 12 as well. In that scenario, I wouldn't be against bringing back GP2, potentially on a minimum to fill out the roster, because I think looking at that, you would need some perimeter defense. Like, that's quite lacking. You could also probably do with another wing forward option like a Taurean Prince, but again, that's probably like he's not going to be too excited about that if he's coming in and he sees that he's not necessarily in the top 10 of the rotation. Buddy Hield, in that standpoint, that perspective, would probably be tradable, I think, because you're looking at White, Podziemski both coming off the bench. And then if you've got Buddy Hield also coming off the bench, that's probably overkill in terms of guards and even an overkill in shooting to a degree as well, although you can never have enough shooting. Perhaps Hield could therefore be a trade target to try and get another one of those forward 3-and-D types as well. So we'll wait and see. In terms of the young guys, obviously, you've got Alex Tui, Will Richard. I expect both of those guys to maybe be on two-way contracts. So right now, I've kind of got Tui and Richard on 2 ways with Taron Armstrong as well. Now, that's obviously going to be dictated by what we see in Summer League, by what happens in training camp. I'd keep an eye on Pat Spencer, because Pat Spencer is actually eligible for to go back onto a 2-way deal to begin next season, which, again, the Warriors kind of need a backup point guard. And I'm not sure Pat Spencer's the answer, but if they don't look and target anybody, again, Kobe White could be that for the Warriors under the trade that I just proposed. But otherwise, Pat Spencer could be an option, and I wouldn't love him on the main roster necessarily, but I wouldn't hate him going back on a 2-way deal. Obviously, Taron Armstrong as well finished the season on a 2-way deal. He could remain there as well, but again, could be in trouble if they prefer Spencer, who obviously has some NBA experience now. Jackson Rowe also ended on a 2-way contract. I think I just sent him back to Santa Cruz, 6'7" forward. Again, maybe they could do with that. Kevin Knox is another one. Again, I wouldn't be totally against Kevin Knox, again, because I'm saying under this, trade proposal that I make that you probably need a 6'7", 6'8" forward type. So maybe he's like your 13th or 14th guy. I do expect the Warriors to probably have, in a month, say, like they'll have probably 13 on the roster, and then they might have a battle in training camp and preseason for the 14th roster spot. Then it's very unlike they usually enter the season with 14 players or even 13 players for the first week. You can have up to 2 weeks with 13 players. Obviously, they very, very rarely have their full allotted 15 players on the roster. So I'm assuming they'll probably do the same thing again and then just sign guys later down the track. We'll wait. Who knows what can happen mid-season with trades and whatever else. So it's going to be fascinating. It's going to be fascinating. But to me, the Kuminga thing is obviously the big domino. Once that falls, the Warriors can kind of know. And this is why Dunleavy said we want to get this sorted ASAP, because you can't be waiting around trying to work out the Kuminga situation, because then all the top free agents are just going to disappear, right? And you're not going to have access to anyone once. If you wait a week for the Kuminga thing to be sorted, and as a result you can't really sign anyone in the meantime, then you're going to get a week in and you're going to be looking around thinking, well, what do we got left here? Right. So that's the problem with the Warriors. It's why Kuminga has a little bit of upper hand to a degree, because obviously he's got to be the one that signs the contract, whether that be with the Warriors or anywhere else. So it's going to be absolutely fascinating, but he's the first domino to fall. Obviously, GP2 and Looney as free agents are going to be a big watch as well. Monty Poole of NBC Sports Bay Area says that GP2's time with the Warriors is in serious jeopardy, and that according to a source, it's looking doubtful for him to return. So potentially GP2 on the move. And Looney, again, I just don't think he's the answer. Like, you can't have him start, and if he's not starting, he's probably behind Post and maybe TJD as well entering next season, assuming there's some kind of jump and development from TJD. So Looney, to me, could also be on the move. Again, I wouldn't be totally against him coming back on a minimum contract, but I also want another floor spacing veteran like a Lopez or a Horford. So that would make like Looney the fourth center. Maybe you trade TJD and make Looney your third. I don't know, but there's obviously going to be a bit of a watch. There's 6 guys that are uncontracted from the current, from the end of the playoff roster, which is obviously Kuminga is the big one, Peyton Looney, Kevin Knox, Pat Spencer, and Braxton Key. Of those 6 guys, I think Braxton Key is the only guy that I can sit here right now and say will not be on the Warriors next season. I don't see him getting a main roster spot, and he's actually now ineligible for a 2-way deal. So there's no real way I can see him coming back. The other guys, I can see a path. I can see a path for Kevin Knox coming back on the main roster. He's obviously not eligible for a 2-way. Pat Spencer is. I could see Spencer on a 2-way again, maybe. So we'll wait and see. Let me know, guys, if you're watching this on YouTube. Let me know in the comments what you would like the Warriors to do this offseason, what you'd like them to do with Kuminga, any kind of sign and trade proposals you might have. Give me some feedback on the one I laid out with the Bulls and Nets and Warriors executing that 3-team trade. I don't know. We'll wait and see what happens in the next couple of days, but it's going to be absolutely massive. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that would be greatly appreciated. You can follow me at POK252. That's POK252 on X/Twitter. Thanks to those of you that are listening via your podcast feed as well. I'll be back probably after the first day of free agency, maybe just to give a kind of rundown and my thoughts on what happens regarding the Warriors and other teams around the league after the first day of free agency. Thanks again, guys.